All right, well, welcome in. I'm Gregory Frank with EverResi Media, and this is Talking Frankly, Voices of SFR BTR. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with two of the most sought-after thought leaders in the SFR BTR multifamily space to discuss the dynamic topic of BTR versus multifamily. Ahead of Zonda's BTR conference on February 3rd and 4th, 2025, in Arlington, Texas, we're joined by Kimberly Byrum, Managing Principal of Multifamily at Zonda, and Jeremy Edmiston, Executive Managing Director, U.S. Lead for Build-to-Rent sector at Cushman Wakefield. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning, Gregory. Hey, Kimberly.
Hello.
So demand is growing. We're in the early stages of what will be a significant asset class. We're grateful to have you both here today to unpack the unique dynamics of BTR versus multifamily. So Jeremy, let me turn it over to you and let's kick things off.
Thank you, Gregory. And how much fun and what a privilege it is to get to sit down with Kimberly and talk about, B2R space, especially as we race into 2025. And although there are several challenges going on in the space today, I thought it would make sense really to start with the demand, right? And start with, the reality that we are in the middle of a housing crisis. But it's important to start with the facts as it relates to the growing demand that we have. And obviously, Kimberly, you and your team dive into a lot of demographic studies in real time, just have such a depth of experience, right, in the space over the last, several years. And with that, can you walk us through, what's the real time like drivers with regard to demand and the various renter cohorts?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. Quickly, I'm reflecting a little bit as you were talking, and I was thinking about I've been in this industry so long, I've actually seen a couple of asset classes come into this space and gain excitement and operating efficiencies, et cetera. One was back when the student housing markets came into play with the leasing by the bed, and we studied those markets as they began to really take off and are now an asset class, as well as the active adult space, which is that age restricted apartment that's coming into the space. We've actually seen the single family rentals kind of eclipse a lot of the growth that happened in student housing as well as in the active adult space in a very short period of time. So it's a very fascinating asset class and very interesting to study. My favorite graph is the demographics, and I like to look at it by age cohorts of the U.S. population. So each line is a age cohort, and we start at the age of 20. And so you can see I've got these color coded by the different generations. And you have the Gen Zers, you have the millennials, and that's a very large generation. You have the Gen Xers, of which I am one. You have baby boomers, and then the silent generation. And so when I look at this chart, one of the first things that I like to point out is there's a little orange line that starts at the age of 20. And if you count those number of lines, that is 16 years. So that's 16 years of runway, so to speak, in terms of rental housing that will be needed for those people that are coming right out of school, that are beginning to build their careers and build their lives. And so that's a great runway for any type of rental housing and just housing in general that will be needed to meet the needs of this younger generation. Then you have the millennials, and I really draw a line in the middle of the millennials. And you have the millennials on the right-hand side that are the older millennials, and you have the millennials on the left-hand side. And right in the middle of that, there's a really distinct, important point. And that second chart I'm going to show you in a minute shows you what the average age of the first-time home buyer was. And for many years, it was 32 or 33 years old, is what you'll see on that chart. It hit 35 last year, or 2 years ago, and last year it actually went up to 38 years old. So when you look at those millennials and you look right down the middle, you have some that have been able to buy homes and own homes currently, but you have a lot of them that that kind of miss that opportunity. And so for me, there's a little gray box at the top of this chart, and that 4 or 5 years of age cohorts that are 32-ish to 35, 36, that group is a prime renter group for this BTR space. And so I think we're really seeing this demographics hitting at the exact time that this asset class is coming to market. I have another gray bar on the other end of the Gen Xers that are primarily homeowners. And by the way, the little bubbles in the middle of the generations are actually the percent of the age cohorts that are renters. And so then you go into those Gen Xers, and I do have a bubble, a little square above the oldest of the Gen Xers who are like me. I'm tired of my house. I'm tired of a tree falling down. I'm tired of getting a new roof because I do live in Dallas and we have hail, and I'm ready for a change. I'm ready for some other type of opportunity where someone else is doing everything for me. So that is a potential also kind of cream on top of the demand that we already have from that younger millennial population that is moving into the lifestyle where they might want less dense housing for a yard, for maybe a small toddler, and certainly a fur baby. And then you kind of go down that continuum, and just to kind of end the housing needs that we have, I have a line that kind of goes down, and that is the silver tsunami. And we definitely are seeing that age restricted apartment become important. The average age currently of residents in that is 72 years old. And you can see that tsunami is coming, and that there is actually some BTR. And at our conference, we're going to have one of the developers that has begun to build for that age cohort there on one of our panels, to talk about the demand in the BTR space. And BTR makes a lot of sense for age restricted adults because they aren't as comfortable going into the higher density. Maybe they've been in a house for a very long time. And so this is a great crossover for them because it's rental. They don't have to deal with a lot of the problems with owning a home, but they still have that same lifestyle. So I think it's a great opportunity, and the demographics definitely support BTR in that space.
That's great, Kimberly. And, as I look across our portfolio, back to that age spectrum, right? The average age of home buyer, right? That went to 38, just, wrapping up 24. If I look at the average age of primary leaseholder in our B2R portfolio is right between 38 and 39. It's a little younger for the cottages and higher density and townhomes. It's a little north of 40 for the detached. Right. And so even in real time, our portfolio, just from our perspective, is really, confirming that data. Right. And just yesterday, to your point, right there at the end, right, with the silver tsunami, that was great. I'm going to have to steal that one. I sat with a friend who's a retired CEO of a major like private, higher education institution, who's by himself now, and that's exactly what he is looking for, right? Like, oh, I still want some space. I want a private, small backyard. I want a great location. I want to lose all the things you're talking about. I want to basically, lose what's known as the guy for the pool and all these different things, and just be able to come and go and leave there for 6 weeks at a time to go see my kids, or go travel overseas and not worry about it. And so and he fits right into that, right? So he's gosh, like late 60s, right? So that's just one example, but I think there's a big unfolding of that, and the numbers don't lie about that as it relates to that wave.
Yeah, and I think from, the leasing perspective, though, something to think about with those older cohorts is it does take them longer to make a decision and to make a lifestyle change like that. And so absorption's slower in active adult. So we're going to have to change the way that we market and educate and get people into our communities, because a lot of our technologies are built for that millennial renter, right? And they're used to things a certain way. At Zonda, we did some research for our multifamily concept home last year where we actually studied how people embrace technology in different parts of the customer journey. And I actually looked at it by cohort, and you can definitely see differences in how the different age groups want to consume and research and get information. And so if we're going after that older crowd and we want to improve our absorption rate, I think there are different ways that we we need to market and provide information and the services all the way down the line for those groups.
That's right. You nailed it. I would say, and I get this question every day on, and we'll touch on some, operations and operations and efficiencies here in a moment. But that's the big question: is okay, we're bombarded with technology, and new technology all the time, right? But as we kind of think about it from our perspective and our portfolio and our team, is just making sure we're hitting what's the wildly important goal, and is that giving our guests choices to interface with our team, the product itself, right? And being prepared to be relentless in communication, whatever medium that may be. And like what you just mentioned, it may be an old-fashioned phone call, it might be a text message, but being able to be able to move quickly, right? Because throughout that continuum of those demographic segmentations, if there is one thing true, right? Folks want to be responded to quickly. Whatever information they want to get, they want us to be on top of it, and that's where the technology has to match up to it.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Alliant is like the 5th largest specialty insurance brokerage and services firm in the country, with about, 4.6 approaching $5 billion in revenue annually, which I gotta say is pretty wild to say that out loud, because I think we were top 10 when I arrived. I want to point out the emphasis on the word specialty. Alliant is pretty unique in that, we really don't want to be the largest in every category, only the category that itself sets itself apart from. We want to be a specialty grocer that has only the highest quality products in every category that it wants to dominate in. And that's probably a good segue into what we do as it relates to the SFR, BTR, multifamily space. Alliant insures just over 2.5 million apartments across the country and just shy of about 400,000 plus single family homes for rent, which also includes, your BTR units nationally.
Get a glimpse of insights from our upcoming panelists.
We're excited to be involved with this particular Zonda conference. We have actually a long history with Zonda going back. We started in the business in this product in 2016 and 2017. I know we engaged with Tim Sullivan and some of the team members of the initial predecessor to Zonda. We've had a close relationship with them over the period of time until today. This will be my first year. I'm excited to be there. Our view is that Zonda is really a premium provider of product and information in the space. They do a really excellent job of providing information that's clear, concise, and we appreciate the focus. It's a emerging industry, it's an emerging product type, and I got to give them credit because they were very early in getting into the BTR space. So we're excited about it. I'm really pleased to be involved.
So we've talked about demand, the big picture, and the facts there, right, that are just unavoidable, and such a tailwind for the space. From a developer's perspective, and I know both of us spend a lot of time providing guidance and ideas to our clients. Deals are tough to get done today based on a number of factors. It's certainly not because there isn't enough demand, right? It's more about obviously the capital market side, land costs. Even though construction costs have somewhat leveled off, it's hard to make the numbers work. But given the research you've done, what product types are you seeing that have the potential to yield the most favorable returns, and at the same time, right, fill the need from a demand perspective from what people are literally writing their rent checks for? What are you seeing there in real time?
I have so many different options here. So bear with me. I have some notes, but I've probably first and foremost, we're going back to our knitting a little bit and what we know, and that is a well-located garden deal really always hits the spot. And when I say well-located, I mean near transportation arteries. People are getting called back to work somewhat. that will continue. And certainly depending on what region of the country, and many of the southeastern markets are already highly occupied, or more highly occupied in their offices. So garden well located near those transportation arteries, and very necessary to be near retail. And we've seen, I'm beginning to analyze the top lease ups for 2024. And, the number one property in Texas was, in fact, a garden style deal. So that's first and foremost. Another thing I would say in getting deals to underwrite is we're going to start seeing project sizes get larger again. So that's good news for you, Jeremy. A lot to manage, but it's also hard because it's a hard lease up. It's hard when you have north of 300 residents at 1.7 or 1.9 persons per home. But even just last year, I saw the lease up comparison from the year prior. The average project size is up about 12%, and we're going to continue to see that. We're going to see larger deals coming to market to make deals pencil. I'm also seeing some hybrids. And when I say hybrid, I mean gardens with some townhomes. And that's becoming, again, kind of meeting the need of that older demographic, but mixing that up with your traditional garden so that your numbers, you're spreading that cost over more units. So you're not just doing a dedicated townhome 90 unit deal, you're doing a 300 unit deal with 30 or 40% townhomes potentially. In terms of BTR, the trend I'm seeing there, again, where the demand is strong, is locating near those top master plan communities. And we definitely have seen that out in Katy. There's a project there that definitely is hitting my radar in terms of, top performance in terms of rental rates and absorption, and just being near those master plan communities. But that's an important thing to think about, because are you going after the people who are moving into the area to provide services for the homeowners, or are you building for someone who maybe wants to test drive the area and buy a home in the master plan community later? And that would be, unit mix wise, you might design that differently just depending on what you're thinking there. And then, just overall, again, kind of how deals are penciling and how people are making deals work. I mean, we're seeing in our rental housing outlook, where we study the markets on a quarterly basis, just a very big shift in the whole BTR space towards more townhomes. And that's just more density. And that's coming away from the cottage and coming away from the single family detached. So just seeing more townhomes come to market.
That's right. And that's what we're seeing too. If I look at the communities, the vast majority of communities that we're launching that are delivering or have begun lease up in the fourth quarter of 24, now going into 2025, are higher density, a great number of townhomes. Kimberly, and it's not surprising. And I know you mentioned it earlier. I have the same. Every year that goes by, it's like, oh my goodness, been doing this long enough for a number of years I don't care to mention. But if I look way back into the mid to late 90s through the early 2000s and developments, we got to be a part of, looking at, a block of townhomes, right? Like I think of a few communities that, right here in DFW that are West Plano, okay, Spring Creek and the toll road. And when I look back at commentary from the developers based on performance, right? The comment was always, I wish we could have dialed in and built 25% more townhomes with direct access garages, right? So for 30 plus years, we've seen the demand for those, and now getting more intentional about, well, what happens when you throw a little private space into it, right? And you really have more a scientific approach to amenities, things like that. And of course, discipline in location. So it's not surprising, right, at all. And I think that's also how we price in that millennial that you're speaking of, right? When we talk about that chunk rent, because once you get north of a certain rent, unless, in my view, unless you're in a very specific set of zip codes where the incomes are going to match up and the percentage of a person's, gross income on a monthly basis is okay in the low 20s rent. But when we're talking about kind of the middle of the fairway, I think there's also sensitivity there just based on size.
That's a critical piece of what we do when we look at townhomes, is the size. You cannot get too big We also know that the 3-story ones are less desirable than the 2, but my goodness, you get really tight bedroom size when you go into a two-story townhome. And then the size of the garage, if you're in Texas, chances are you may have a truck, and certainly out in the suburbs, and those don't always fit. And so, just that size of the garage being more of a standard is extremely important as well. So there's a lot of design aspects there, but getting too big definitely hinders your ability to achieve the rents that you'd like to achieve in your underwriting. And so I totally agree with that. I've even seen in the urban areas, a couple of clients do 1-bedroom townhomes. And that was actually pretty cool and done well. And so you're competing against maybe wrap product that's, your standard wrap, and someone that maybe is a little older that, has more space and has a nice car, would love to have that direct access 1-car garage, but doesn't need the extra room in the bedrooms. So some other things I've seen.
No, it is. That's important to note that, and we've been doing it now as a space, right, in a more organized way, really dating back to about 2017, right? But as we educate and introduce more and more product, I think you hit on something there where if I'm just thinking about, again, Atlanta, Dallas, you just kind of go down the line, but young professionals in maybe their second or third professional job. And you're right, doing the comparison of course, high-rise living, a very much a different deal, and a lot of other, luxury amenities, things like that, that you can do. But of making the decision, if there's the opportunity to have a inside the loop urban core 800 square feet with a garage, right? Almost like a mini brownstone. That's a big deal. And there is certainly a market for that for sure.
Totally. Totally.
You already know that closing build-to-rent, single-family rental, and multifamily transactions can be challenging. Stewart Investor Solutions makes it simple. When you work with Stewart Investor Solutions, you get a true, dedicated, centralized team, not simply a centralized order desk. Our team has decades of experience to efficiently handle your transactions from start to finish, based on your workflow and requirements. You'll have the right partner for transactions of any size and any location. And Stewart Investor Solutions isn't just about title and closing. Our family of companies includes property data and analytics for evaluating opportunities, valuations and appraisals, and mobile and remote online notary services for anytime, anywhere signings, along with industry-leading credit and verification services for screening renters. This unmatched strength and expertise in the build-to-rent, single-family rental, and multifamily space is why one of the nation's largest investors recently chose Stewart Investor Solutions to successfully handle a transaction involving nearly 2,000 homes with over 1,000 HOAs spanning multiple states. Reach out to Peggy Dalton or Mike Soja to learn how Stewart Investor Solutions can help you find and close your next deal.
Get a glimpse of insights from our upcoming panelists.
I've been in the real estate industry, it's over 30 years, and more than half of my time was in the new home building. What I love about a conference, and especially now just starting out fresh, new year, this type of a conference gives you an opportunity to meet with colleagues who have just levels of experience in various areas of our industry, not only SFR, but home building, and to share philosophies and what's going on the ground with them. This provides a perfect, not only network opportunity, but to just share some expertise and get some great takeaways. It's a little complex out there right now, and especially as we work through, SFR, BTR, and the challenges that our property managers face today, and how we handle these different parts of our business. So I know we're going to spend some time working on strategies, not only trying to drive revenue, to drive occupancy, but also controlling costs.
Another thing not to belabor the townhome point, but, a lot of times I have clients call me and they'll say, should I do a 2-car garage or should I do living space and a 1-car garage? And I'm very mathematically inclined, and, we do a lot of research, and, my math suggest you should always do the garage for the reason that you can get, 125, call it maybe 225 for a 2-car garage, and you're probably only getting, 120 to 150 per square foot for the living space. That may not even be that good on that ground floor level. So, I always my advice is, typically to go with the second car garage because you're going to get paid more for that, for the square foot that you're building.
100%. I totally agree. And that's what we see in real-time resident feedback and just occupancies and revenue growth on the garages themselves, right? Especially in those living spaces where we're bifurcating, right? That garage, rent and so forth. Okay, so we talked about, product types that make sense both financially and meeting the needs of the demand out there. And over the past few years, and I say few years, I mean, really, again, dating back even a couple of years prior to, kind of the pandemic phase, we were seeing the run up in build to rent and build to rent being defined by a number of those product types, right? Specifically in the Sun Belt, which followed job growth, which followed, the tailwinds of in migration, somewhat caused by, pandemic. And now, as we go into 25, 26, and 27, there are some emerging markets out there. But what are your thoughts on top markets for, continued development or even expansion, right? Like uncharted territory, if you will.
Well, I will say first and foremost, I'm pretty bullish on the oil economies right now, certainly with the new administration coming in with the drill baby drill idea. And I'm already seeing, one of the things that I like to look at is rent growth by REIT and by market. And you're already seeing Houston kind of pop up above in that positive rent territory on the REIT portfolios. And so I really, I like Houston, and Houston marches to a beat of a different drum, and you really need to know your facts. So you need to know your sites because of the no zoning and all of those different things. But I definitely, overall pretty positive about Houston. And then as a little subset of that, is Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is probably one of those burgeoning markets that no one knows about, and it's definitely a tertiary in many ways. But there is not a lot of BTR there, period. So whether it be cottage style or otherwise, that's another opportunity potentially. I like Denver and Salt Lake City primarily for cottage. They've built a lot of townhomes in Denver, but they have not done that horizontal community. And I love that because there are younger people there, and they are price sensitive. So if we can do those small ones, those small 2s and those small 3s in that cottage style and give them some of the amenities that they want, I really like that. I like that for Denver. I like that for Salt Lake. I also like that for Nashville. I know we have a lot going on in the urban core of Nashville, but there are young people that may move out. Again, I really like that cottage style product for there. And then there's just some sleeper markets in the middle of the country that, a little bit I'm watching, one, for instance, is Omaha, Nebraska. Not a lot going on there. It's a very stable market. You've seen a lot going on in the Ohio and the Indies, but what about Omaha? And then Louisville, Kentucky is another one where we just haven't seen a lot of BTR. We'd love to see some more there, and, in all of its phases. So we just haven't seen a lot pop up in those areas. And then, of course, a secondary, but something that I'm watching again with the regime changes is the manufacturing communities, places where Blue Oval is, Savannah, Georgia, Memphis, some of those manufacturing communities that just haven't had housing built, kind of like the Reno, Sparks, Nevada exercise. And so I think those types of markets are a little riskier, but, definitely with the right product type and with the right land pricing, I think there's some opportunity in some of those markets as well.
No, Kimberly, you're right. And we're seeing it. You mentioned Omaha. We have built to rent by way of detached home community that's in Omaha, and it's under 100 homes. I mean, I would say, though, for that market, that's probably a sweet spot in size. But you're right, especially as we look at a number of those markets, which were the last to come out of recovery from pandemic, coupled with, back to the office. And then also the reality, like you mentioned, of Memphis, right? And there's a lot of others that apply there, but also just, well, gosh, there's a great amount of rental supply in general that hasn't been replaced. It's what I would call under demolished with some obsolete, options, right? And I think in some of those markets, that's where finding again the sweet spot in construction type matching up with rents. That's been some of the challenges we've seen too. Is in some of those markets, it's difficult to put a tier one class A brownstone type townhome on the ground and it make financial sense from day one, right? Because you start bumping up against pricing, pressure. And I would agree on your comment on Denver and Nashville by the same way that we saw success early, even prior to the pandemic, on higher density cottage BTR in the Austin market, right? There's a lot of similarities there that, hey, that's where all the cool kids want to live. There's a lot of similarities between those three markets, including like a Salt Lake and pricing those folks in. What we saw in proving out too, that younger millennial who had an income well over 100,000 and could live in a downtown Austin in a high rise, easy, but chose to live 20 minutes outside the CBD or a 20-minute commute to their office to just have that, true, like a sense of place where it's like, hey, I've got my own place. I can have a little backyard gathering. And oh, by the way, I have an 800 square foot one bedroom that happens to have a backyard. So that is a big deal. I think that'll continue to be, a shift for sure.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
I've been dedicated to utility management for the last 20 years and have helped millions of properties get a handle around one of their biggest burdens. When I start to look at multifamily versus build to rent, utilities become incredibly complex. At a multifamily site, between common area and vacant bills, you might be processing 50 invoices. But at a build to rent community where you have a water, sewer, trash, and electric bill over 200 homes, you might have over 800 invoices. So any problems or nuances that you experience at a smaller setting are magnified at build to rent. That becomes very costly. A couple of things that the multifamily industry I'm seeing isn't aware of and is not used to and are learning kind of the hard way is that when individually metered for water and sewer, if you put that in a tenant's name and they're not paying, that becomes lienable. When adopting an owner-held model, now you're not paying activation fees every time a tenant moves out to get that power on. But more importantly, you're not experiencing down days.
Switching gears into operations, right? These are always the biggest questions, right? At least in my mind, from developer and investor and operations, right? Because there's been this thesis out there now for a number of years that if we build it, they will come. It will 100% be leased sight unseen. We can lease this community with a robot going down the sidewalk. All kinds of crazy stuff, right? And there's been a great deal of lessons learned. If we roll back to 2017, a great number of innovations, all kinds of things have happened. But given that pressure on margins, yield on cost, right, cost of capital, all those things, what innovations or adjustments are you seeing? Are you recommending dive into potential developments today?
Well, we're always looking at eliminating people from on-site, and that's your world every day. And our research on that, we did that resident journey research, found sadly that everybody still wants a human. So where can we remove the humans in the process, in the research? Where is it acceptable? And probably the number one place, and we all already know this because there's a lot of technology focused in this area, is in the maintenance area. And you definitely see that even with the scattered site REITs. They really focus on that roving maintenance team, using mobile apps, going in and checking, on a quarterly basis, doing inspections, things of that nature. But that part of the resident journey is very well accepted, that there be some form of technology associated with at least the scheduling and the follow-up and all of those things that are important. Obviously, you still need a human to go and do all of those check-ins and all of the work that needs to be done. And those people, 9 times out of 10, when you read apartment ratings, online ratings, they're the ones that really drive positive reviews. pros are the people that come in and fix everything because they are very personable and they've been trained well. And so you see that. So overall, that's probably the area where the most operating efficiencies have occurred. On the leasing side, and I think this is one of the areas that's really important. I was just recently looking at lease ups, and one of the things that I factor into who are the top lease ups is their online ratings. And what I found was just numerically, and this is a point in time, so don't come after me, but I found that the average online rating score for a BTR community is about 10 points lower than a garden deal. And that's interesting. And my hypothesis on that is that we have fewer people in the office and fewer people to respond and communicate, as you said earlier. And so, we need to find ways to do that follow up by cohort in a more efficient way. And number one, first and foremost, so I went yesterday and just qualitatively read a lot of reviews. And a lot of them were not, after I moved in, I was happy. I kept calling and no one answered the phone, and I wanted to get some leasing information. And so we've got to do a better job of that part of it. And that's the very beginning of the resident journey, just the inquiry piece. How can we be better at following up on the inquiry piece? Once we get someone, we follow up, we credit check them, they're moving in, they're happy, they're fine. But just getting someone in the office and being able to see a unit is one of the biggest challenges in that whole journey. So I think that's an area where we can do better. I also, but we talk about lease ups. And BTR lease ups are slower. Part of that, I think, is because we don't have the number of leasing people, obviously, and then the pricing, and it's a different demographic, so it's not as deep. We've got to find those people and get them in there. And sometimes our locations are not on the beaten path; they're off. Which for a home builder is great, but for a person who has to release this, every other year, we want people to see us. And so drive-by traffic is extremely important. And so overall, I think that, when people ask me, hey, if I lower my price, will I lease faster? And my answer is always no. You may change your demographics, your profile of your resident, but the only way you're going to lease faster is to have more leasing people or some other mechanism to lease for you. And so we've seen it time and again. If you put during a lease up, more leasing people at the property, you're going to get more leases. So it's real simple. Now that's easy to say, but hard to do in your world where you're like, hey, I'm going to hire you to do this, but only until you get 25 leases and then you're out, So there's just this human capital aspect that we need to solve for. That's definitely, I think, an area where we can do better and maybe improve that lease up time and in the market.
Agreed. No, I was gonna say in our experience, right, and this is evolving, right? We have a build to rent operations playbook that's living and breathing and addresses all the various factors you just discussed, from processes to people, tech side, maintenance, and all that. But you're right, and some of it is also just the reallocation of tasks, right? In a more, and this is a fancy word that's used all the time, but it reallocated more in a, centralizing the right things to put our teams in position to do what they do best, right? And that is just where folks can have a fantastic experience from the first phone call, the first touch point, the tour, and all the way through. Well, after we've leased a home or a cottage townhome, whatever we want to call it, that experience doesn't just stop there, right? It just keeps, it keeps going and going, right? And at the same time, being sensitive to the investment plans, either of the developer, or now we're starting to see more transactions, more longer term positions with institutional capital, right? And somewhat at times having to push back a little bit on the thesis of, oh, well, now that it's stabilized, well, now we can trim expenses tremendously, right, to help mitigate the cost of insurance, the cost of property taxes, right? And even with lower turnover, which that has proved out, especially in the larger homes, right, that attrition and renewal rates are higher, longevity. There's just a science to it. But I've also seen a more conservative approach, right? Because the data says so. So we're not having to fight that battle as much. It kind of leads us into, talking about, where things are going from an investment standpoint, right? And the flows of capital into this space, which has increased over the last 6 years. It's increased 98%, right? We've gone from kind of a high single digit number in the billions to now right at 100 billion that's been committed to the space. Not all of that's been deployed, right? There are challenges right now of, okay, well, even when cap rates in the 10-year and the perfect storm comes together, right, we're going to have a quite a bit of capital chasing relative to the overall multifamily sector, a small amount of opportunities. But what are your thoughts on the momentum this could give to the space, especially as in light of, recent announcements such as Avalon Bay and others, right? It just continues to snowball in the right direction. But what are your thoughts on that for next phase of growth?
Next phase, well, I think the REITs coming into the space is very exciting. And when you think about and you look at, what a REIT is trying to do, they're looking for stability for FFO, and they're looking for product diversification and market diversification, et cetera. And, as you mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of markets that haven't been picked over at this point. And so this ability to diversify your product holdings is a great opportunity. And if you look at, like, for instance, MAA reports their average portfolio, the age of their portfolio, or the residents in their portfolio is 31. And you mentioned just a minute ago that you've got 37-year-olds and 40-year-olds. So that it definitely offers, an opportunity to expand. You're not cannibalizing yourself. You're adding a new product type, and it does operate very similarly to multifamily, unlike student housing, for instance, where execution will kill you if you're not on top of it. And so it's a logically makes a lot of sense to go down that path. And Camden has 2 BTR deals under construction currently in Houston in their background so that they can watch it and learn, right? So they're smart. We like to watch what they're doing. And so they're dipping their toe in on the development side. UDR has technically a townhome deal at Vitruvian. I don't think anybody would really call that BTR, but it, by our definitions of a fully townhome deal, technically it could be, but that's a lot more inner urban, and they've owned that land forever. But so they're definitely, I guess, technically own a BTR deal or in the process of doing that. So I think it makes a great sense. I think it will, provide some exit opportunities for some localized groups that are building, great product, and, for the merchant builder model out there, so that REITs can come in and purchase assets and portfolios of assets in markets, like the institutional BTR community or REITs currently. They're looking for a lot of scale. Well, multifamily already has scale in many of those markets. It's really just a matter of buying that product type. So I think that they can really make an impact on transaction activity and clarity of pricing in the markets. And obviously, they bring a level of operational expertise to just the space. It's going to be really interesting to watch and see how they expand and how rapidly they do.
No, that's good. Agreed there as well. We're seeing it, have seen it, both not just in the operations side, but as we represent those out there raising equity, procuring, debt. And then, of course, what we've seen over the last couple of years and doing right at 2 billion in transaction volume on the sell side. It's now certainly become a who's who. If you're not in, that you're going in either by way of ground up development or acquiring stabilized or near stabilized, well located communities. And really, that's kind of runs the spectrum of all those B2R product types. So I think you're right as it relates to the diversifying those allocations within the living spaces. In my conversations with a number of institutions over the last 6 months, that certainly is the case, right? So there's a large living spaces allocation, which obviously includes multifamily, perhaps some student, even manufactured, but really increasing the designated allocation for build to rent, which is great.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
So Lending One was founded just about 10 years ago. Our roots are really based on residential investment properties. Our full focus is around residential investment properties. We were acquired about 3 years ago by one of the world's largest asset managers, and that was really the impetus for starting the institutional group, which is really focused around larger institutional backed operators, build to rent developers, and home builders. And we've really built a suite of products to address that market. It started focusing around the SFR scattered property strategy. Over the last 12 to 18 months or so, we've really seen that morph into build to rent, and we've really seen that product take off. Our reaction to that was really to go all in and really focus our efforts on being able to service, not only operators and owners of scattered site portfolios, but obviously developers and builders and operators of build to rent communities. Our suite of products addresses the full life cycle of those strategies.
Get a glimpse of insights from our upcoming panelists.
What I found most intriguing is that this is a conference just for build to rent. We go to the IMNs and we go to all these other conferences and, the scattered homes and the multifamilies, and that's not what we are, right? So to be in a conference with all the other players focused specifically on our platform it's going to be amazing. I'm very excited. I've known Alicia McPhee for a long time with IH. She and I work together, and just lessons learned. How can we do things better? How can we get the word out for our platform so that the true customer knows we're there? Very excited to be part of this conference, joining a lot of colleagues that I've worked with in the past. The conference itself, the platform, is specifically around BTR. I've been to many conferences where it's scattered site, multifamily, developers, investors, whatnot. This is all about the operations of the BTR platform. And to have that all in one group and to be able to, collaborate with different leaders and operators and lessons learned, I'm really excited to join. I don't want to give away my whole panel, right? But we will be bringing in operational excellences and how we can improve on our margins without negating the resident experience. So with that being said, our people in the field are the number one impact to our business and to the resident satisfaction and their experience.
But I do think on just a question mark in my mind is some of these BTR deals are very far out, and that's a little typically farther than a REIT likes to go. So that will be interesting to see. They do like markets that don't have a lot of pipeline, and that's not going to be the case, as we go into the Southeast generally. But, going a little farther out than what they're normally used to with their traditional garden stuff, it could be interesting. If you are, a merchant builder model, definitely thinking about that exit strategy, traffic counts. I always fuss at my developers who don't bring me sites that have 15,000 cars a day. I want to see that. I had a BTR deal that we underwrote recently that had 22 cars a day going by. And that was an updated traffic count. In a very high growth area, arguably, but like along that street, it was like a very, very not well trafficked road. So those are some of the things that I think, like selection wise, I think are extremely important because, as you know, people need to find you. And while they do use the internet and do their research and do all those things, they still kind of recall, I've been in this area and I saw this thing. And, so I'm interested in that way.
That's right. Especially if you draw a line back to your earlier point, which we have several that we're managing in real time that are within high traffic master plan communities, right? Where there are hundreds and hundreds of homes at all different levels, with all different builders and amenities and things like that. And that is huge, right? You don't want to be out of sight, out of mind, right? And to your point, we've done a lot of deals where I look back and I'm like, okay, it's interesting. This institution, it seems like they would never do, a 250 unit garden or a mid-rise deal in this market, but all day they'll do 100 homes that the average size is 1,500 to 1,800 square feet, right? In a town that you may have to drive an hour or two from the nearest regional airport. But it's interesting. But it's because, okay, well, there's demand. There isn't pipeline. There are jobs. And, this is where perhaps our separate account client wants to go. They have initiatives. They have goals, right? They want to play a role in this providing, yes, placemaking, providing somewhat the American dream for rent, right? And so that's a good narrative to go back if you have the data, to investment committee. I think this is where state employee pension funds, teachers funds, all those kinds of things. I have a lot of conversations with planning and zoning commissions and municipalities and city councils who don't understand the product. And when you bring it to that type of light, and this goes, kind of as we wrap up our discussion, thinking about, hey, just being transparent about what the biggest challenges are going into the next couple of years, which obviously capital markets, and we're not going back to interest rates of 2019 and 20. We're not going there, but we have so many economic tailwinds, but then we also have challenges that are, okay, somewhat, political and still a lot of regionality to the understanding of what this space is. But what do you see are this is kind of like the ender here, right? Like one last thing, a couple of notes on biggest challenge and then also the biggest opportunities that are coming.
Well, I think some of the challenges that we're going to see in the short term in BTR and multifamily, because let's just say we've been pretty much operating multifamily, and BTR seems to, for the most part, trend with multifamily. So during this last phase of lease up, we've had a lot of things in lease up and that have achieved stabilization. We have used, higher than normal concessions. That'll be a challenge in 2025 is to, maintain those stable rent rolls and keep that 25% renewal, or turnover rate low. So that's probably first and foremost in my mind that what I'll be watching. I love to watch stabilized concessions. I think that they are a great indicator of what's going on in a market. So are the lease ups going into the stabilized properties? And what we've seen, at least in our rental housing outlook, is that the average concession right now on a stabilized BTR is about 6%, which is high. And so that does tell me that in order to stay competitive with the new product that's coming in the market, we are having to offer some concession to stay there. And part of that is the high rent check. We always see higher concessions in the tower type product because it's more expensive. And so in order to make an impact and make someone make a decision, you have to have a higher number. And so that could be part of that. And then, just really, like I've already talked about, is as we go through this next wave of new product coming into the market, I really would love to see some faster lease up paces. And how can we figure out how to improve that absorption rate in the BTR space? So that's probably my biggest, challenge for 2025. What about you?
Agreed. No, I think when I look at the and with a few additions there, I still think there's a little bit of this space defining itself separate from kind of these false narratives out there about, okay, Wall Street taking opportunities away, right, from people in the U.S. and buying homes, which is far from the truth. The allocation of institutional Wall Street ownership of rental housing in the U.S. is tiny compared to what some of the articles and reports and things that come out. Right. The reality is that 34% of this country rents their living space. Right. And where B2R comes into play is just a better choice. It's a great bridge, or it's a more of a long-term permanent opportunity for someone to have a wonderful, either in town or predominantly a wonderful suburban life without having to stroke what's the better part of $100,000 check at the closing table, right? We can't escape the fact right now that most of those first-time home buyers, right, at average age, going back to mid to late 30s now, they've lost 30+% of their buying power in the last 2 years. It's evaporated, right? Just because the prices really aren't coming down and the cost of finance there is incredible. So there's just delay, right? So household formation somewhat being delayed too. So when you put all that together, it's just great. It's great tailwinds. But no, I think the challenge is, you're right, of maybe not having knee-jerk reactions in pricing, right? I think at times there's this race a little bit we want to hold steady, right? And science in some cases is saying, well, no, yes, you maybe adjust that rent based on the lease term, because that's another trend that I think is a great opportunity as we have more institutional ownership in the B2R space. We're going to have a more scientific approach to revenue management and the right use of tools that have been proven, with daily pricing, those kinds of things. I think those are the challenges. But right now, I think, again, biggest challenge being, okay, sales comps, right, that will help induce more investment. And then being able to burn off concessions so that when we're using market comps to justify a new deal or to buy a deal, it's just a better outlook for sure. Yeah. Well, this has been great. Exciting time again as we race into 2025, and really looking forward to the conference here in a few weeks.
Yeah, good to see you. And thank you
Yeah,
so much
see you.
for having me.
Thank you both. Exciting times ahead here in the BTR space. Thankfully, in just 4 weeks, we'll all gather with the top voices in SFR, BTR, and multifamily for 2 jam-packed days. This is a critical event for those shaping rental housing, from panels to the BTR connection. For those of you joining us, if you have not had the opportunity to register, please go ahead and click that link below to join Zonda's BTR conference. It's February 2nd and 3rd, Arlington, Texas. Please go ahead and click below. Kimberly, Jeremy, and I would love to connect with you there. Please be sure to follow EverResi Media on LinkedIn. We have more cutting-edge programming dedicated to SFR, BTR coming to our platform in 2025. We're building the world's largest SFR, BTR community. We're glad you're here. Welcome home. I'm Gregory Frank for EverResi Media. Thank you again to Kimberly and Jeremy. And thank you to all of you for the privilege of your time.